And welcome back to The Trail, a college baseball recruiting podcast. My name is Trevor Powers, and I am joined, as always, by fellow host of this podcast, Sam Sharp. Sam, we are now entering almost middle of August. Most of guys' summer ball seasons are wrapping up. We're going to talk about that, and we're also going to talk a little bit about the settlement changes and some of the conversations that we've had. But first, before we get into that, how are you doing? I know it's a busy time of year. Sounds like you have a lot of recruits that are hopefully getting ready to pull the trigger on some 4-year or 2-year homes.
For sure, for sure. Kind of getting to the end of summer ball here in the Northeast, so get a chance to settle down here a little bit, and hopefully we got some exciting days ahead for some of our players at CSA and go from there.
Yeah, no, awesome. It's a good problem to have, right? To be busy this time of year. Obviously, that means conversations and dialogues are being had with college coaches for both 2025s and 2026s. It's a busy, busy time in college baseball recruiting, and that's why we're here to talk about it, right? So today, as I
For
mentioned,
sure.
we're going to talk about a couple different topics. But first, we had a question brought to us in the comment sections, which is super exciting for all the listeners that may be tuning into this to this episode for the first time. First off, make sure you smash the subscribe button on the YouTube channel. We're coming to you at least in some form weekly. We're both busy at this time of year, but we still work hard to get these episodes out weekly. But if you have any specific questions, you can feel free to either leave it in the comment section of any video that we might have, or send us an email at thetrailrecruiting@gmail.com. Again, that's thetrailrecruiting@gmail.com. That's going to be posted in the show notes below. So make sure you check that out. But we had a question from our last episode. Obviously, settlement changes and full scholarships and roster sizes decreasing, all of the things that are happening across college baseball. If you want more information on that, go check out our last episode where this comment was left. But loyal listener to the podcast, all the podcasts that we have on the Backside Groundballs Media Network, Canes Cats Heat 3056 asked us a specific question about Miami, and we're going to talk about Miami, the University of Miami. But he wanted to basically know, how does this impact schools like Miami that tuition is roughly $94,000 a year, and they do not have many sports in general? I believe the number is 17 for Miami, but they don't have many sports in general, but specifically women's sports. So, Sam, I'll let you kind of take that, and we can kind of steer the conversation from here.
Yeah, I think we've mentioned this in some previous episodes, right? The legislation has changed the lay of the land across college athletics, specifically to our sport here, college baseball. All right, we've seen the expansion of scholarships, reduction of the roster cap, but now you got to go and actually figure out ways to install the scholarship situation, right? It's great to say that there's a ability to offer 34 student athletes at a full freight, but there's a lot of things beyond just the fundraising aspect, right? Obviously, Miami does, I think, pretty well from a financial standpoint. Big time college football. You have obviously the ACC, with their media rights deal and things like that. You're not going to be short, from a dollars and cents standpoint. But anytime you have a smaller athletic department there, and you have to really think about the Title IX implications of just taking and adding 22 scholarships into the mix. So I think that there's going to be a period of time here where these athletic departments have to dive into the details of their specific institution and really figure out how they're going to be able to implement these things. I think across the board, even at some of the strongest baseball programs, there's still the football element, right? And football also got expansion of scholarships, right? They go from 85 to 105, and I think we all have to be real when we look at the pecking order on these campuses, right? Jump back into the Hurricanes down there at the University of Miami. Like, I'm pretty sure Mario Cristobal and the Hurricane football program is going to be a little bit more of a priority, in terms of trying to get to that full allotment that the NCAA is now provided. So there's a lot of sports that are seeing effect. Obviously, baseball. It's great to see, the added numbers. Right. I think there's been a long time coming in that regard, but ultimately, this rollout is not going to be overnight. There's a lot of specifics that have to get figured out at an institutional level in order to make this a reality.
Yeah, I think it's such a fascinating discussion because one, for people that don't know, Miami is a private school. Obviously, most state schools don't charge $94,000 in tuition per year. It is a high academic private school for that reason as well. So a lot of people think of the University of Miami and they think state school, right? Most of the time, you have schools that are in towns and things like that. It's the University of Miami, Florida. No, it's the University of Miami. So it's a very interesting part of how this impacts private schools. Obviously, Miami isn't the only nationally recognized private school that's also a competitor in baseball. You have schools like Vanderbilt that are obviously Duke, who we saw win the ACC championship, and all of those private schools. And I think that's the conversation that really comes into play, is how this impacts private schools, right? Miami's obviously, like you said, Mario Cristobal, they're going to get 105 scholarships, and I'm sure Canes Cats Heat 3056 would be mad if they didn't get 105 full scholarships. I guarantee his allegiance is more towards football than it is to baseball, right? Everybody knows why we wear these logos with pride, and a lot of times it's because of the football team. But, for these smaller athletic departments, it's going to be interesting to see how these numbers do stack up. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if we look at it and a Miami, it's never going to be public, right? We're only going to know by hearsay, but it might be a gradual climb in baseball scholarships. It might be a sticking around 12 to 15, I hate to say, maybe 15 to 20 at most. It just depends, because obviously with football adding 20, there's got to be something that also comes with it, which means something on the men's side is going to take a hit.
Yeah, I think, the other aspect of this that I'm sure you're going to start to see the ripple effect here in the coming months is, our other men's scholarship sports cut, right? Or at least scholarship reduction in those sports that are, not as lucrative in terms of the balance sheet or popular on campus, right? In kind of a tiering system of sorts where, hey, obviously you have football, men's basketball, maybe at a place like a Vanderbilt, the Miami baseball creeps into that tier one. And then you have some of the Olympic sports where they're going to pull men's scholarships, both from a funding standpoint, right? Because you're talking about having to, get to that high number in the 90,000 range, and then also from a Title IX perspective, being able to kind of reshuffle the deck in terms of how those are being allotted across your men's athletics teams. So there's a lot of details that have to get figured out, both at private and state schools. I can't see many places in the next 365 days being at 34 scholarships. Like I think that's a pipe dream. No matter how dedicated you are to the sport, and there are some places that obviously, there's a tremendous amount of commitment to the baseball program. There's just a lot of logistical issues that still need to be, determined of how to roll this out. And that's the one thing I think most people would agree with in terms of the legislation. There's not really a ground, implementation of how these things should be, done across campuses.
Yeah, I mean, shocker, the NCAA decides to throw a legislation change on schools similar to the name, image, and likeness change and the transfer portal change. It's no rollout the way the NCAA does it. The second they make a decision, they expect changes to be made in the immediate future. And again, that's such a fascinating conversation, because when you look at just the blanket statement of for what most private schools are, right? So you look at the Wake Forest, the Duke, the Vanderbilts, the Miamis, and we can go across the board. You imagine them getting 34 full and actually getting approved for 34 full. Again, let's take out that part of the equation of how we get there. I think it could really benefit private schools, right? You don't have to go to a kid and say, hey, we're giving you 60% in this hypothetical scenario at 94K, which is still, okay, so the kid still has to do quick math in my head, roughly 40,000 in tuition. Like that's expensive. Like that's a full cost of tuition at some universities. So initially there was like a part of me that was like, man, this is really going to help private schools, and this is really going to be one that's obviously going to put them in a good position, because if they are able to fund 34 full, they can go grab any kid from any location and just bring them in and put them in a position to be successful, obviously. But if they don't go even get close to that number, again, stacking and merit aid and how that comes into play, yeah, we don't have to get into the nitty gritty admissions part of it, but you're now expecting kids that are going to be recruited between, when kids choose Miami, a lot of times they're picking between Florida State, Miami, Florida, UCF, and schools of that nature that are high Power 5 programs. They're either picking between Miami with a 60% scholarship and still paying 40, or University of Central Florida with a 30% scholarship paying 12, 15, right? And the financial component does impact Miami's recruiting.
Yes, but that's not new to the situation going forward, right? That's something that staff has had
True.
to,
Yeah.
recruit to in the past, and there's certainly ways that they've been able to make it more affordable, right, for their recruits. You obviously have name, image, and likeness in play, across these type of programs as well, right? So these players are definitely getting financial reward from other avenues. And then I think the last part I would say, just in terms of, how it progresses to a certain extent, is the finances are obviously a key determining factor for families, but you still have the playing time element, right, and being able to advance your career, right. A lot of guys who are going to end up at Vanderbilt, Duke, Miami, places of that ilk in our sport, right, like they have ambitions of being able to play the game even beyond their college years, and the only way to do that is to have success on the field, and I kind of throw it
Mm-hmm.
to the football comparison, right? Football's been on full scholarships for a long time, right? There's still guys transferring in that sport, right? Because they want to seek out
Mm-hmm.
opportunities for them to play and perform and get a chance to go, and get drafted. And I think that's going to continue to be an element, no matter what the financial, threshold looks like for a player in different situations, right? You got to be on the field. So these are things that, while the financial aspect is changing in our sport, that age-old problem of the depth chart and being stuck behind guys is still going to persist, right? You see it, like I said, in football, and ultimately, I think for players, yes, you obviously want to be in a situation where you're going to, accrue the least amount of debt and put your family in the best position, but it's still about making a decision where you're going to get the best experience as a student athlete. And if you're a guy who's fortunate to have a chance at potentially playing beyond, college eligibility, then, it really becomes a huge aspect of where can you develop, where can you play, and pursue the draft, in 3 to 4 years.
No doubt. And I think, again, the best availability, or the best ability is availability, and that comes for drafting purposes as well. You could be the most talented kid in the world, but if you don't play at all, whether it's stuck behind somebody or whether it's a multitude of different circumstances, you're not going to have very much draft interest. Side note, I actually saw a kid that played at College of Florida, I believe, pitched no innings this year, has one college inning. He was drafted, and he's like 96 to 98 with a wicked slider. So he's had a lot of success with the Angels. They took him in the 13th round. So he had his opportunities, but he was also a really special talent there. So it's an outlier in this space. And when we're talking about that, you got to get on the field if you want to play at the next level. And ultimately that comes into the decision. But again, for anybody that may have any other questions about recruiting, some of the topics that we've covered, obviously the settlement is right in front of everybody's face. So that might be where a lot of the questions are. Either leave it in the comments below or shoot us an email at thetrailrecruiting@gmail.com, and we'll definitely get those and make them a focal part of all of the podcast episodes that we do, and it creates discussion and allows us to kind of offer our perspective on some different of the changing landscape that we're in college athletics. So Sam, let's talk a little bit about the end of summer ball, right? We're now sitting here about 10 days into August as we record this now. Most summer ball programs are wrapped up. We're getting closer each and every day to entering a dead period and a little bit of gap in Division I recruiting. So a lot of the typical big recruiting events are going to be put on the back burner for the foreseeable future. Let's talk a little bit about what players should be thinking, what families, where the discussion should go. Let's stay pretty present focused, and let's speak about the 2025 group, because obviously they're probably a lot of times in decision mode, or at least making very important decisions for how they handle the fall. So speak a little bit on kind of the conversations you've been having with your 2025s and maybe where their head should be at in this space and in this time of year as they wrap up summer ball and get ready to head back to school and potentially put together fall plans.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, as you come to this point in the calendar, if you're fortunate to be in a position to start taking some visits, I would prioritize that right away and get on campuses and hear messaging from coaches and start to really dive into, is this a place that fits me, across those key parameters. If you're a 2025 that's had some good conversation with some coaches and they have some camps coming up, I think this is, a good time to probably think about registering for, those upcoming dates and getting on those campuses and getting a chance to play in front of those staffs. I would stay away from the, hey, this coach hasn't seen me and, pipe dream scenario. The guys who are going to be prioritized at these different camps right now are most likely, recruits that they've seen throughout the summer ball circuit and now want to just take another look at here probably before they make a decision to offer or not to offer at this point in the calendar. So really lock in on the schools that are showing you some love. I think ultimately those are going to be your best hit rate, and it's time to really, I think, have some tough conversations, whether it's internally with you and your parents or with, your travel ball coach, advisor, who's ever been an aspect and supporting you in the process is, the schools that are in the mix right now are probably the places you need to really seriously think about, being committable opportunities. A lot of Division I baseball, for example, especially in light of the rosters being taken down from 40 to 34, upon this 2025 class getting to campus in about a year's time. A lot of it's done, you know what I mean? Like that's just the reality of it. And, it's not even a referendum on you as a player necessarily, right? Some schools that maybe were recruiting you previously just don't have room in that class anymore because they're trying not to over recruit and be, above that 34 cap. So, really focus on the schools that are showing you some love. I think it's always a good decision, to go where you're wanted, right? And that usually breeds, pretty good success long term. If you're in a situation where, maybe the recruiting process isn't, materializing quite to that point yet, I would tell you to really maybe see if there's, one or two schools that do make sense and are still recruiting you, whether it's you reaching out, with some emails or, again, somebody in your circle having some contact with those schools and seeing if you can hit on, a specific maybe 1 to 3 camps where, you can really start to jumpstart your recruiting process with those programs.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day is the big thing right now is we need to be realistic about where we're at, right? Where are we having conversations? As you said, you want to go where you're wanted, especially again, as the sad nature of the recruiting process is we don't have unlimited time and we don't have unlimited resources and money and gas and all the things that we need from that standpoint. So we really, really have to be strategic as a 2025 graduate at this point in time and make sure that we're making the right decisions in where we go. The days of the Division I opportunities cropping up at this point in time, again, partially it does have something to do with the skill level of you. Maybe we need to be more honest about where we stack. But as Sam mentioned, it's harder now than it's ever been to have Division I opportunities. So you may have known somebody in the past that was similar skill level to you and Division I opportunities came up. Well, that's not the reality of college baseball recruiting in 2024. And You just have to be okay with that. Find yourself the right fit and find yourself a home. It looked like you had something to say there. So the floor is yours.
It's gotten a lot harder in the last 20 days, right? Forget about previous
Yes.
cycles. You look at where things were in the first part of June as summer ball began to where we are here in August. Like, it's changed a lot just within the past month. So, that's just an element at play. It's not anybody's fault. It's not college baseball coach's fault. It's not your travel ball coach's fault. It's not your fault. It's just the landscape that we're in. Um, the other thing too, and Trevor, you made a good point in terms of prioritizing, right, those places because of, all the different things in terms of, time, energy, the financial commitment it takes to get to these camps and visits. Also keep in mind that you're going to start to see a pretty quick, pace with commitments at D2 and D3 schools now, right? So like, similar to what we're talking about with space in Division One classes. Not that there's a hard cap necessarily, from a NCAA level to Division Three schools, but institutions and coaches have a certain number that they like to carry, and as other players make decisions, you could be on the outside looking in, and the worst thing I think would be is to sit there and hope for a school that you haven't communicated with. You're hoping to just go to camp and pick to click on that day, and again, what are low odds in that situation? You end up missing out on the perfect Division 3 program. You know what I mean? And that's a really bad scenario. You know what I mean? If you're not tuned in to where you are in the process and making a decision that's the best fit for your future.
Yeah, I mean, don't think that these Division 3 coaches just sit on their hands and are going to wait for you to show up and be like, oh, hey, yeah, now I'm interested in playing for your program in November, December, or even January of your senior year. No, these guys are working hard to fill their classes just as much as you're working hard to get identified. So, if you think that they don't fill up roster spots as well, again, more times than not, talent's going to find its way to find a home in some situations, but it's not unlimited roster spots. It's not unlimited in terms of how much they want to be under and things like that. And you want to go somewhere where you're going to actually succeed and making sure you're honest about where you stack up and being proactive about that. Again, as I've said to a lot of people over the last couple months, one offer is better than no offers, right? And it doesn't matter where that offer came from, where that conversation was started, that is better than nothing.
You can only go to one school.
True.
We talk about this all the time. Like, 7 offers, right? Oftentimes, I would tell you, creates more confusion for a player and family, and you can only choose one. Obviously the transfer portal guys end up at 2, 3 schools nowadays. I understand that. Don't come back at us and with that perspective. But as a high school player right now, you can only commit to one school, right? So if that one school is the right place, jump on it, right? If you have an opportunity to maybe visit 2 or 3 places and get a couple offers, sit down, do your pros and cons, understand what each opportunity looks like, and think about making a decision. This time of the calendar usually is pretty good point to start to think about end game strategy.
Yeah, I lost you for a second there, but 100%. I think that's again, it's a very nuanced conversation, but now is the time to be honest and find out the best situation and make a strategic plan, and not be shooting for the moon. It's realistic and making sure we find the right opportunities for us. Let's go to 2026 class and where they should kind of be handling this time in the calendar of, obviously, they're entering their junior year. I think the 2026 class is one that's very interesting to me because there are the players that, obviously, August 1, we talked about in our last episode, where contact period is open. There's guys hearing from schools, things like that. Fall is an active recruiting period for 5 weeks, so there are opportunities to get seen even more. But I want to talk about the guys that are fringe, right? Fringe is the best way to say it, but again, a couple 2026s that I've been around that are really, really good ball players, but maybe could use 15 to 20 pounds of muscle and things like that that would really change their profile and put them in a better position. I want to know your perspective on the development versus exposure for those guys that maybe are solid ball players, but maybe to reach their goals might need to add strength, speed, just muscle mass in general, and how they should handle the next couple months, because there's a lot of development to be had in the fall as well as the winter.
No doubt. I think those are always the hardest guys to probably advise during this period. I think it's a balancing act, right? If you're a guy who, whether you got calls on August 1st or didn't, um, you've had a chance to play in front of some Division One schools. There's some good feedback coming to you. It might make sense to go to a camp or two, right? To see if you can have an opportunity to really progress with that program, especially if it's a place that you really value as a student athlete. But I definitely think, for the 26s, it's prudent that they really lock in on getting back into the weight room, hitting their nutritional goals, focusing on maybe some of the feedback that they've received throughout the course of the summer recruiting period, whether that's on the physicality side or skill set perspective within their game. For a lot of these 26s that are in this, quote unquote fringe category, the focal point of the fall calendar really becomes Fort Myers, WWBA underclass, October 3rd to the 7th, down in Fort Myers, Florida. You'll get, pretty much, a very large contingent of Division One coaches, ranging from Power Four all the way through mid-major, even into some smaller conferences, and that's really going to be your next big opportunity to get back out in front of the schools that have expressed some type of interest, showcase your development over the course of a 8-week period, let's call it, from here in mid-August through the beginning of October. And then really at that point, kind of use that as the next check-in point, right? Are you starting to get some offers out of Fort Myers? Maybe there's a couple of schools that liked you, want to get you to a camp as that next quiet period begins in mid-October. And maybe you're in a spot to make a potential commitment at the end of the calendar year. Or, hey, another good check-in point. Schools are going to continue to obviously monitor your progress, and now you really start to focus on the off-season and your next developmental plan. So I think that's a good perspective on those guys. And then if you're a 2026 that, maybe projects to a lower level, Division II, Division III, or isn't quite there, in terms of a Division I prospect at this point in the calendar year, you obviously need to really just hone in on development and continuing to take your game to the next level. Stay away from camps and showcases. If you're not going to be able to go into those settings and impress, you're really not doing yourself any favors, in my opinion, at this point in your journey.
Yeah, I've had this conversation with a lot of people. I've said, people ask, when should I start going to camps and when should I start focusing on exposure? It's when you're ready, right? It does a 2026, again, 2025's close your ears. There is no when you're ready. Either you're ready now or you're not, right? So the time to develop might be gone, but you could be a 2020, yeah, exactly. You could be 2028 who's big, physical, strong, and can leave the yard from a right-handed stick, and it's like, they can't talk to you, but like maybe get on somebody's radar. But you could also be a 2026 who needs just some finer tuning. And again, 6 to 8 months in the weight room can be career changing. This is for professional guys. I've seen pro guys that get that full 6 to 8 month off season that just change their profile. And again, maybe we're not ready in the fall. So many people want to chase every exposure opportunity that we can get. But if we're not showcasing legitimate tools in the exposure opportunities that we are getting, take that money, either A, save it, or B, put it into a strength conditioning coach, put it into a speed coach, put it into nutrition advice, put it into, any form of development that you're looking to get from the baseball side of things, and then go out in the 2025 summer and be a dude, right? Go have a great high school season, go be a dude in the 2025 summer, and next thing you know, you're a completely different prospect and schools are way more intrigued by you. So, my big thing is like, I'm saying you got to be honest and reflect where you're at, but don't be afraid to take some months to just focus on you and your development if you're not right there yet, just yet.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think something we've preached on this podcast since the very first episode, right, is player evaluation being at the heart of any good recruiting strategy. So you need to lean on the people that you know and trust who will be candid with you. If there are holes in your game that are going to prevent you from getting, legitimate offers and interest right now as a 2026, go find ways to improve those areas.
Mm-hmm. 100%. And obviously this conversation, 2027s and beyond, development, right? Like I think that's the biggest thing. Obviously, as you get younger and younger in this process, the main priorities are going to be development. So just in case we have some listeners who are like, oh, my son's a 2027, but I'm really intrigued. Development. We play a lot of baseball in the summer, and that's fine, right? Like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with playing as much baseball as we do, but there's also time that needs to be spent. I think that's the biggest thing from an evaluator's standpoint that everybody would 100% agree on. Kids aren't physical enough, right? What's the biggest difference between the college freshman and the high school senior? Physicality. Do you fill out your uniform well? Do you do XYZ? Can you stay healthy for a full season? And weight room development can be the difference there. And again, trust me, it's something that I seen the first time I went out to a high school game was, man, these kids are small. It's like, we got to get bigger. We need some bigger, faster, stronger dudes. And if you show up to a showcase event and you're physically ready to play college baseball, you could go 0 for 3. You're going to have people intrigued by your profile, and people are going to be interested about what you have.
Agreed. We buy with our eyes.
True. 100%. Well, Sam, obviously, a little bit of a shorter episode here. I feel like we packed a decent amount in. Is there anything else that you kind of want to make sure, whether it's end of summer ball, whether it's anything about fall ball, and obviously we're probably going to have a couple episodes now before we get going full-fledged in the fall, but anything else you want our listeners to kind of know as they get closer to this, or as they're in this point in their calendar and their recruiting process?
No, I would just reiterate kind of how we kicked it off. Like, if you have some specific questions, about the recruiting process, or maybe where your son is at currently, you want us to, discuss it on the pod, would love to hear from you guys and, provide any details we can that would be beneficial to our listeners out there.
Mm-hmm. 100%. That's what we're here for, right? Any Q&A form episode would be, we could do 50, 60 minutes on a Q&A. We'll explore some other options for people that are, interested and they've kind of come back for content here on the Backside Groundballs Media YouTube channel. We could talk about doing live stuff, live Q&A. There's a ton of different creative ways as we get closer to the quote-unquote off-season, right? As things slow down for both Sam and I, we can definitely map out some times, whether we're coming to you with some form of consistency, but we got to hear back from you first before we can start scheduling those things. We don't want to get on a live Q&A, and it's just Sam and I, which we would do, no problems at all. But we definitely want to make sure it's at least interesting enough for everybody to join in and listen. But Sam, I appreciate you hopping on. I know it's busy this time of year, and I know our listeners will greatly appreciate the advice that we can offer. But that'll do for this episode of The Trail.